We are live. Thank y'all so much for tapping into the Liberation Lab channel. My name is Bobby. I am an educator, a principal, just serving to bring liberation, to bring disruption to our status quo of education. And in this time together, we are going to be talking about celebrating Black histories. That is on purpose, but I'm going to allow the genius that is Dr. King to talk about that. So, Dr. King, why don't you introduce yourself to folks who may not be familiar with you or your work?
Hi, well, welcome. I'm LaGarrett King. I am a professor at the University at Buffalo, in Buffalo, New York. I'm also the founding director for the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I think about where we're seated here in this January 31st, and Black History Month kicks off tomorrow, and I think about just kind of my upbringing. I think about schooling for me, and you kind of always get introduced to uh, the regulars.
Yeah,
Um, Rosa Rosa Parks. She sat. That's all we know about her.
she was
After
tired.
she was tired, she just sat down.
Hmm.
And then after she sat down, then Martin walked.
Hmm.
He had a dream.
Hmm.
After Martin had a dream, uh, you know, we saw everybody by the not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character,
Hmm.
and it was one big happy party after that.
Yeah,
It's kind of the it's kind of the refrain.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so let me cue this up for you. When we think about how Black history has been traditionally taught, one, has that been your experience? And then two, um, what now as educators are engaging with this topic who may be new, like I'm imagining there's going to be a point where they're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing it wrong, what do I do now?
Hmm. Hmm.
If you could speak to that for us, as we kick off our conversation.
Yeah, so you know, I think about my childhood and kind of my love for Black history, and many times I ask people, when did you fall in love with Black history, right?
Hmm.
I took that from Brown Sugar, for those who kind of understand the movie, the classic Black movie, Brown Sugar with Tay Diggs and Sanaa Nathan and stuff. When do you fall in love with hip hop? So,
Right.
typically I just kind of ask people, when do you fall in love with Black history? And people begin to start, reflecting on that. And when I reflected as a kid, I was always interested in history, but kind of similar to a lot of people's experiences. Like my years in school were the 80s and the 90s, right? The 20th century, as my son liked to say, right? Like, wow, man, he was in the 20th century,
Yeah.
right? But the history didn't make any sense to me, right?
Mm.
So you would learn all these things, and first of all, you didn't see people that look like you, and then when you asked about people who look like you, they were like, you were enslaved, right? Um, I said, okay, all right, so we're slaves, okay. So what about this? And they'll say, hey, not all slave owners were mean. You were like family, and all this. I was like, oh, they like being slaves, and essentially, the answers were yes. And I knew something was wrong with that because just as a child, a 5, 6, 7 year old, I'm sitting there, it just doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm saying? So from there, I mean, yeah. So in many ways, Black history has been treating this country, and it doesn't make any sense, right? And it's purposeful for it not to make any sense, right? Because history is a mirror to our soul, right? History is more than just the past, right? People
Mm.
ask people all the time, well, what's history? And they, well, it's a study of the past. It's a study, so we don't, they do cute little phrases like, we study history so we don't repeat it, right? Type of
Hmm.
deal. And I was like, no, but what is history? What's the purpose of history? And many people don't understand that history is simply about identity,
Mm.
right? History is the first time that we learn about ourselves. It's also the first time that we learn about others. As
Mm.
parents, right, we joke all the time that our kids are constantly talking and asking us all these questions, right? But they're trying to figure out who we are. Dad, tell me the time you met mom, or my granddaddy, tell me how bad my mama was, right? Because they're trying to figure out who they are. And those historic and those are historical inquiry questions that they're
Yeah.
asking. And we don't see it as that, but it are. So they're trying to figure out who they are in the context of the history in which they live, right?
Yeah.
So history is about identity, right? It helps us understand who we are, right? It helps us understand about the other. So when you understand about yourself, and let's take white folk for example, if I can be as blunt, right?
Yes, sir.
The history curriculum tells them that they are exceptional no matter who they're talking about. They're the best thing since sliced bread, right? White folk did all these things. They explored the world, right? They discovered different places. They built these wonderful civilizations, right? And you sit there, what did black folk do, right? Well, they borrowed from the white people and they learned, from them. And you're sitting there like thinking like, whoa, but that's a powerful psychological thing to really kind of understand, because for some people, right, who identify with those particular people, they say, we're great. And you're not that great. We're smart. You're not that smart. So therefore you hear, discourses about affirmative action. The only reason why you're here is because of this. Why? Because their history has taught them that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You you're the most important historical figure ever
Mm.
to be on this planet, and that's arrogance.
Yes.
Like I tell
Yes.
people all the time, like, you don't think other countries who live by water looked at that water and said, "Hey, I wonder what's over there."
Mm.
I don't know. Let's build a boat and let's see.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just those simple things that our history curriculum does,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get into our framework, but a lot of times I try to tell people like the Black history that we're learning is really not Black history.
Yeah.
So when you get into that, like, like, wow, I've been doing this wrong. Like, Black history is history from Black people's perspectives. So when
Right.
you're learning Black history, when you're teaching and you're trying to understand Black history, are you learning that from Black people's perspectives, or are you learning it from other people's lenses?
Mm.
Right? I joke a lot.
Please.
So I tell people, if I'm at the grocery store and one of my wife's friends or colleagues come up to me and ask me about Christina. Well, how's Christina? Right? It's my wife, my lovely wife. And in my mind, I'm saying, well, she's married to me, so apparently she's doing great. Right?
Mm-hmm.
She woke up with a smile on her face and all this other stuff. But if you really want to know how she's doing, you have to ask her. And
Yeah.
that's how Black history is kind of situated within the curriculum.
Yes.
That history is looked upon in other people's lenses.
Yes.
Of course, Brown versus Board of Education was a wonderful thing. Okay, did that come from Black folk? Because if you ask Black folk about Brown versus Board of Education, that narrative is so different,
Yeah.
right? If you
Yeah.
ask Black folk about enslavement, that narrative is totally different, right? Because we have to kind of focus on notions of perspectives, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that moment when someone's saying, "Oh, I'm doing it wrong," am I actually teaching these histories from these people's perspectives?
Yeah. Well, you bring up such a I think a valid point is when we talk about who is telling the story, it is almost as though the things that we desire to share, uh, or it's like our story was being told, but it was the microphone was handed to the perspectives, the ideology, the worldview of white folks.
Yeah.
So we can't, I said a while ago, and I think it lends itself to your work and what you've talked about. And that is, I really want to live in a world where liberation doesn't have to come with a permission slip. It always
Mm-hmm.
seems like the work that we are doing has to be signed off on by somebody else. Did we check all the boxes of their comfort? Is it palatable enough for uh, the white gaze? Does somebody have to approve um, and say, "Oh no, I put my stamp of approval on that," right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about uh, and I specifically titled it this, we talk about the perspectives of Black histories. And I crossed out the Y on our graphic because I
Mhm.
wanted people to really get it. Um, I think about your work. I think about what you shared, um, and that is when we are taught Black history, it is taught from the perspectives that don't include us at all. Can you talk to us more about that and why we're crossing out the Y and adding an IES in our time together?
Yeah, I think the majority of our history is kind of uh, focused on that one particular perspective, right? And what's interesting is and people sometimes disagree and they think it's kind of a difficult concept to understand. But I tell people all the time, it's like, I know, you sometimes talk to your boys, and we all talk to our friends, and they're telling this story, and it's outlandish. Everybody that's listened to the story, they're squishing their mouth up like, you had a triple double. You had no triple double. Well, you shot 15 3-pointers straight in a. You, you 360 windmill. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever, right? And and literally, you'll have students, right, sitting in classes, or we hope students are sitting in classes with that
Yeah.
same look when we're learning history. Hey, wait, what?
Mm,
What? You mean no one ran away? What you mean? People just sit down and let people beat them? No, no, nah, nah. I just can't. You know what I'm saying? But the why denotes a singular,
yeah.
right? So when we learn about history, it just says we should learn about a history, the
Hmm.
why,
Hmm.
right? And when we learn about history with the why, sometimes that defaults to what some people would consider the traditional narrative. White men who are heterosexual, who own land, who are middle class to wealthy, who are Protestant, who are able-bodied. All those narratives are centered on that particular topic. The IES, of course, denotes multiple. So it kind of helps us understand and checks us. Wait a minute. Even within Black history, there's Black histories.
Yeah.
Because in many times, even when we focus on Black history, we leave out tons of people, and so now, our Black history is very male centric, very
Hmm.
Protestant centric, very able bodied, right? Very
Yeah.
well, our whole civil rights narrative is based on middle class Black folk in the South,
Yep.
right? You know what I'm saying? So the IES serves as a check. Okay, we're learning Black histories. Okay, all right. So are we too male centric here? So what do we need to learn? Number one, or what narratives do we need to include within this class or this course or this book I'm writing or this YouTube that I'm producing, etc., etc. What do I need to include to ensure that we get closest to the full story as possible? Right now, we're never going to get the full and complete story because history is manufactured. History is based on firsthand accounts, primary source documents, and sometimes, it's like the law. Like you can't prove it, it didn't happen, right? So some primary sources are going to be, erased. It's going to be left out. You know, um, like I finally found a baby picture because when I was younger, my mom was in a house fire and all my baby pictures were burnt up. So I said, hey, there's proof that I was a baby at one time, right? So all these particular primary sources are extremely important for us to construct and manufacture a history, right? So we're never going to get a complete story, and we have to understand that history is manufactured. There's a lot of little T truths in there, not a lot of capital T truths, meaning that like this actually happens, right? You're dealing with different perspectives, and not
Yeah.
even like racial perspectives, but just human perspectives, right? You're dealing with interpretations of when people read different things, right? You and I can read something and we interpret it totally different based on our experiences, the ways that we look at the world, et cetera, right? So there's so many different interpretations of history that's out there that there's no complete truth to it, but we try to get to it as much as possible. And the only way that we can is to ensure that we have multiple perspectives within those histories.
When you talk about having multiple perspectives, I think about it even in a general sense,
Mm,
right? We don't have a lens for having multiple perspectives as we tackle anything. There's
mm,
very much so a binary sense of how we see life. You are on this side or that side. You are Democrat, you're Republican. You
mhm.
are, and we have these categories that we draw such hard lines in the sand that we don't have any room for the messiness of the middle. Where no, I can agree with this policy, I can agree with this practice, I can agree with this thing, but I disagree with what y'all are talking about here. And I could do the same thing on the other side. We don't really have multiple perspectives as a way of being in our world. So it makes sense that the push that you're giving us is, hey, look, we don't have that for how we see our past. We don't have that for how we see the mirror to our soul. Is
You know,
Go ahead.
you know, we do in the history classes all the time. Who's right? Washington or Du Bois? Who's right?
Yep.
Marcus Garvey or Du Bois? Who's right? King or X? Who's you know what I'm saying? And you're just saying and you're sitting to yourself as you said those binaries, and you're like someone has to be right, someone has to be wrong, right? I mean, for those out there that's watching, if you really want to get some black historians going, you start talking about Booker T. Washington. I mean, that brother is the most controversial historical figure, out there, right? Like some people would say, oh man, Booker T. Washington's a sellout. Some people, oh man, Booker T. Washington is the best thing since sliced bread. He was very practical, economical, et cetera, right? Without really kind of understanding humanity,
Yeah.
right? If we understand historical people, right, as humans, they're flawed, they do, good things, they do questionable things, right? Because they're just human beings, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Washington, yeah, you can say whatever. Washington was accommodationist. He got all this money from these white philanthropists, which I have a theory about why black folk, sometimes don't like other black folk. It's because black folk don't like black folk that white people really like. Like
Okay.
if you ever notice, if white people really like this person, you'd be like, huh? You know what I'm saying? They'd be like, oh yeah, people watching the Cat Williams video, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't like Kevin Hart. White people, too many white people watch his movies. And you just be like, what are we doing here? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because he had all so there's insinuation there that particular person did something right for these particular people to give him money. So
Yep.
why didn't the white philanthropists give Carter G. Woodson this money? Why didn't they give W.E.B. Du Bois this money? Right, type of deal, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, Washington can be called accommodationist, or you can call him a sly character, right? Who knew how to get money for black education. And without Washington, we wouldn't have probably half of these HBCUs, nor would we have these schools, right, that were
Yeah.
developed during that time based on Booker T's efforts, right? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And yes, you can still critique him as well. Like, yeah, he probably needed to be a little bit more politically active, such and such. But then you can kind of understand cash your buck is here. There's a lot of economic opportunity in the South,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So why don't so like for my great grandfather, right, who stayed in Texas while other people in my family moved to California, stayed in Texas, he ended up getting 100 acres of land,
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm saying? So there's folk like that that had that particular understanding, of history and understanding of the present at that time. And then too, you're looking at Du Bois in the Northeast, Washington in the South, two various different places. So to really kind of understand people as historical situations as human and not perfect, I think is a wonderful aspect instead of all these binaries.
For sure. And I think if folks who are listening or folks who will watch this replay, like black folks are worth the complexity. They're worth having those multiple layers. They're worth seeing from different perspectives and not pitting one versus the other as the token black person that did it all for the civil rights movement, right? Is it Malcolm or is it Martin? Is it this or is it that? Like we are not a monolith. We deserve
Yeah.
more than what we've been given in terms of how you see us. And
You know what's
I
fascinating?
please.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I
No, no,
cut
you're
you off. I'm
good.
sorry. No, no. You know what's fascinating? Like what has always been fascinating to me is kind of this concept of black conservatism,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But then I think what happens again, we're not treating this in nuanced ways.
Yes.
Black people are more conservative than society gives them.
Thank you.
You know,
Yes.
they've particularly in the social aspect, right? Fiscally, maybe a little bit different, but there's a lot of but the complexity to that is I don't think a lot of black folk connect with who we call black Republicans or
Absolutely not.
who is on the frac because yeah, black folk are conservative, but they know racism exists. So like, dude, you lost me there.
That part.
you know, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. So
But like all of us have family members who are just conservative because they say the same stuff in the house.
they sure do.
Right? They say the
Absolutely.
stuff in the house, and we just like, yeah, yeah, you're right, yeah, yeah, But that connection is like, but we're not gonna be, but the black conservative within black communities, right? And when we study this throughout history, right? Because people could call like Washington a conservative or something like that, but I think their policies were a little bit different than how we kind of connect the policies of what they try to put on screen as a black conservative, typically associated with the current Republican Party, right? But that doesn't
Right.
necessarily equate to black conservatives within black communities.
Yes. I resonate with that because when you started talking about black conservatism and where that lies, I can think of, you know, this man standing behind Trump, getting to the mic and quoting Fannie Lou Hamer with all the theatrics that he did it with. We're sick and tired. And I sat there and I mean, the amount of anger I had listening to this fool
Mhm.
as he started talking with, and then to add insult to injury, it's, you must really hate her. No, I just really love you. Oh my gosh. Right. So like,
We
how
were
are we
like, what?
supposed to
I mean,
right.
like collectively, the black community went collectively,
Absolutely. Yes.
collectively, right?
I
Because that signals something,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Where it is this white benevolence, and again, it goes back to that notion of why people are very suspicious of when, like, oh, you're really in this particular space, and all these people really like you. You must not be keeping it real in many different ways, right?
Yes.
But that goes back to how we kind of understand um, our history, right? Like the Republican Party, and I'm not a big political person, so I mean, if anybody's political, I'm not really talking about parties per se, but I understand
Hmm.
politics in many different ways.
Hmm.
But when Republicans say, "Well, we're the party of linking," or whatever the case may be, well, have we really studied black folk whose politics were connected to that Republican Party? No, because we don't want to start that, right? But we're very ahistorical when we talk about those things in the public.
Yeah.
And really and truly, I really want someone really test somebody on that one day when they say those talking points. Where we're the party of Lincoln. Well, Lincoln really wasn't this big liberal as y'all thought he was, right? He wasn't dealing anything with slavery. He actually told the slave owners during his inaugural address that he's not interested in ending slavery. So I
Right.
mean, right, but that's the way kind of our history gets kind of construed, misconstrued within public discourse.
So we have on one end this understanding of black folks that are monolithic in nature, and then on the other end, by the time the story is told,
Hmm.
with certain white historical figures, they are now, you know, 7 feet tall, and they've done so many different things that it becomes this tall tale by the time we're done with it.
Yeah.
Um, and which brings me to my point that I was going to say. It is, I think about how there's much at risk if we don't engage like what you're talking about with educators who may be listening. There's so much at stake if we don't engage in this way, if we don't
Hmm.
understand and apply multiple perspectives to history. not only is it not only is it something where blackness as an understanding, black people as we understand black people, but it's also critical thinking, right? Like there's an element of critical thinking that says, wait a minute, like folks are giving you the side eye when you tell this very much so cut and paste history that we've been given all through our lives. But also on the other side, like we should be able to engage and question, right? If I critique Martin in his early years with how he wanted to go about using, nonviolence as his measure to be able to appeal to and to understand and to bring to light certain things, I should be able to do that, right?
Hmm.
And not denigrate the man, so to speak, but to say like this is a critique that I have. But we can't ever really engage with that because if we're and I think this is part of what you're getting at too. For folks um who are accepted in white spaces,
Hmm.
continually accepted, we understand that there is a cost associated with that. That
Yeah.
white acceptance comes with a great cost.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the king that is talked about now,
Hmm.
that is heralded and said, like you have the most racist folks quoting King on their on their Twitter feeds, right? Well, why are they able to do that? Because they rip these things kicking and screaming out of context. They don't understand the history, but they have a little piece that they can use that furthers their agenda. Now apply that to schools. We continue to teach our young, and our students are growing, more diverse, more black and brown, and we're
Hmm.
putting people into the world who don't have this critical lens, don't have this radical consciousness of what it means to actually engage with black history. And so my question for you is, with all of that, is what is at stake if we don't engage, for educators who are listening?
Man, our society.
Mm,
Um, I was telling a group, the other day, like we're what 3 to 4 years removed from the racial reckoning, right?
hmm. Hmm.
And the biggest discourse, there, particularly when everybody was on their learning kick. Oh, I didn't know this. oh, I didn't know this. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, why did they didn't teach me this in school? Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here like, wow, 10 years ago, they said the same thing. I didn't know this. 20
Mm.
years ago, I didn't know this. During the 1960s, they said, I didn't know this. In the 20s, they didn't know this, right? In the 1800s, they didn't know this, right? And, you're sitting there thinking that it's really important for us to understand different histories because everyone, right? But especially white folk right now who have some form of influence and power is because you hold dominion over everyone else at this particular moment.
Mm.
You
Mm.
dominate the teaching force, dominate the police force, you dominate all these powerful positions that um, hold certain forms of power and decision making against other people, right? And we're constantly saying we don't know anything, and it's and it's crazy for a judge not to know the systemic aspects of our racial history. That should be one of the first things that we understand.
Yeah.
And not just that, we are a democracy. We are a very diverse culture.
Yeah.
And there's implications to only learning about one half of the population.
Right.
And it's very dangerous
Right.
because our histories are not your histories. Our historical experiences are not your historical experiences. So if you think everyone's the same, then we're just continue to be, you know, divided in many different ways,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Particularly this notion of a contentious division, right? I think I saw a interview on the Breakfast Club with Nikki Haley, who's running for president, right?
Yep. Yep.
And she was saying division happened during, Barack Obama, and it's one of those things where that type of discourse is dangerous because number one, you know, um, this country has always been divided. If it's from the religious institutions that we attend every Sunday, from the neighborhoods that we live in, right? From the way in which we talk at work and who we hang out with and our friends, et cetera, et cetera. So we've always been a divided nation, and Barack Obama's presidency says more to racist folk than it does about the man who held the office
Mm.
in terms of the division, right? I
Yeah.
think I think we got it wrong before Barack Obama became president. I think we got this wrong. Like all the comedians before President Obama was in the White House would say, "Oh man, the country can't handle a black president," and they would use all the stereotypical tropes of what black people would do in the White House. But in reality, the citizens, right, were not ready in that particular sense, right? Just and for black folk, you do talk about division, a lot of people say he wasn't black enough,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
in many ways he didn't represent the quintessential African American experience,
Right.
and that's not even talking about you know him and his mother being white.
Being
Is the
white.
fact
Right.
that, man, your father wasn't even an American citizen. So there wasn't a linkage to slavery. There wasn't a linkage to the civil rights. So you have all those complexities, in there as well. But a simple black face, right? Who was moderate in many different ways, kind of teed off a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
So for us to not really learn our histories, it really keep us in a state of ignorance, and a state of violence, because what that does is it continues to keep those white supremacist ideologies present, right?
Mm.
So when they say, I think I brought up affirmative action before, and there's this visceral reaction, to affirmative action, because it's like, people believe that there's certain things people didn't achieve based on their merit. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, wow, like the first 350 years,
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
you restricted other people from being in these institutions because of your skin color, right? So you all had a head start when we're talking about home ownership, we're talking about bank financing, we're talking about all these particular things. And then the beauty of it is, even with quote unquote affirmative action aspect, what are we talking about? 1 to 2% increase,
Hmm.
maybe 5% increase, maybe a few more professors in the classrooms when 40 to 50% of the Ivy League is made up of these rich private schools in the Northeast,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
legacy people who were like 30, 40%. So your ear is not to the 3% of black folk who just got into school. It's the 30% of legacy people who probably not even qualified to get into those particular spaces, right? Or whose
Right.
positions are held in those spaces. But because we don't have a clear understanding of history and the complexities of what was done to black folk, right? In these systemic natures, those discourses are allowed to live and continue to
Hmm.
thrive without any criticality towards those particular dispositions.
I think about the students that I have the honor of leading at the school that I serve. And I think about the fact that this month they will be seated in front of teachers, uh, many of whom do not look like them. That's just the sheer reality of any school. And they will sit in front of that person and then they will learn about Black history. It'll come up. And my thing is, there's going to be so much that gets omitted, that doesn't get said. I think about my learning and folks that I got exposed to much later in life. On my wall behind me is James Balwin, because of the influence of his writing and his literature and his speeches. Like, he's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, author. But I learned that much later in life. I didn't have that. I didn't get exposed to his work till you know, uh, you know, so much later that I had a resentment for what I was taught in school. I
Mm-hmm.
remember distinctly being in a class. Um, I was in maybe my sophomore year, and I was sitting in front of Mr. Tarragon. Mr. Tarragon is my social studies teacher, and I'm looking at this picture of the Revolutionary War, and I see a black man getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's one black guy that I seen. I knew he was black because he was, a lot of the black ink went here, even though it was a black and white depiction and all of that. I said, who is that? Crispus Attucks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to know who he is because this is a pivotal moment in the Revolutionary War. And all I see is somebody who looks like me finally, and he's being shot. Like,
Yeah.
it sticks out to me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think about that and the emotional context of that feeling. And I am honestly fearful for my babies, and
Mm-hmm.
not just at my school, but all over. And so to cue the question to you, I would love to hear from you, um, how this omission or misrepresentation can impact students' understanding of themselves and their world.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If we kind of understand the history as identity thing, right? And those emissions, particularly for younger children, right? It's kind of this understanding of why aren't we historically important,
Hmm.
right? And it goes back to in the 1700s when schools began to start popping up. The school textbooks mentioned that people from Africa were heathens and they had no form of history that was of any importance.
Yeah.
One school book even kind of used religion in there, right? um, and I use this quote a lot in my writing, but it said first, and this is a quote from a textbook. First, God made the black man realize that he did poorly, and he kept on trying until he came up with the white man. right?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and of course with the biblical teachings of the curse of Ham, that was one of the first strategies to learn literacy, and those were some of the stories that were used to teach literacy for Black folk, right? It puts ideas in the kids' minds. But was interesting is what it does a lot. However, is it makes students of color, Black students, uninterested in history.
Mm.
Um, I'm not gonna say that it makes Black children feel bad that they're Black, right?
Right.
Because I think a lot of Black households do a pretty good job of instilling that sort of racial pride, right?
Yeah.
However they do it. Like even when we talk about the Kenneth Clark and Mamie Clark study during
Mm-hmm.
Brown versus Board of Education, and that was one of the studies they used to make the argument that um, segregated schools were inferior to integrated schools, and they noted that the Black children selected the white dolls, and they asked
Mm-hmm.
them questions as why they selected the white dolls, which again is a fallacy of history, right? When we actually read the report, the majority of the Black kids selected the black and brown dolls.
Mm.
77% of the Black kids selected the brown and black dolls. Only 22% of the Black kids selected the white dolls. But they used the data from them because the data was so damaging, right? In terms of that. But I bring that up because it helps us understand um, that there's not an inferiority complex within Black communities. Black communities are very proud of being Black. But what it does when we ignore and omit is that we become disjointed to that history curriculum. So when I think history and math are fighting for the worst spot for children of color and Black kids, because they just don't want to hear about slavery again. They don't want to hear about us getting beat or being oppressed and all these other stuff, right? Because it's just not. It does something to our soul, and that's probably a survival mechanism that students have, about that because they want to, feel a little different. Now, on the flip side to it, if we're too positive and heroic, right?
Mm.
Um, Sometimes we bring kind of an uncriticalness to it,
Yeah.
right? So now we can't necessarily have those critical thinking skills that we should be teaching in school. So yeah, to answer that question, I mean, when we are mid, or if we continue to say the same exact things, these students become disjointed and don't even want to learn history because it's like, why?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why do I have to continue to take this curriculum violence, or I'm saying, this
Mm.
pedagogical violence? I don't want to be in this class to do these particular things because A, it's not exciting. B, they're telling us the same thing I learned in third and eighth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And where's the Black folk? And they understand that there's more history to that, particularly if they're from communities where they get these histories in various ways.
When I think about the educators listening to this, I'm I'm going to go on out on a limb and say that there might be some listening now and those who will listen to this replay and wonder, okay, what do I how can I get started? What can I do? And so I would love for you to talk more about the key principles in the Black historical consciousness framework that you write about, and how that can help educators into like developing their curriculum, their instruction, things that they could be doing practically, so that we can, do some work to get rid of this fallacy of Black history versus histories.
Yeah. So I have a Black History framework that I've developed. I've been developing within the last decade or so, right? And I think the first time I kind of had it, written was around 2019, 2020, and it's basically 8 principles that help as a framework for teachers to develop their curriculum, to kind of self check, to make sure that they're providing a holistic education. Black history education to their students. These themes are a combination of me studying historic Black history textbooks. For those who don't know, like we've been dealing with Black history in schools since the late 19th century, and some of the first Black history textbooks were written by Black teachers who didn't like the history curriculum that they were learning in the first place. So you have as early as 1892 a Black history textbook given out to students, right? And then also, Black historians and Black educators have, created different types of frameworks and talked about, Black history in all wells. We just haven't really combined them together, and that's how I came up with the framework. So, those 8 particular principles deal with you can't teach Black history without teaching about power, oppression, and anti-Blackness. You can't teach Black history without teaching about Black agency, resistance, and justice. Principle 3 deals with teaching Black history through Africa as well as the African diaspora. Principle 4 is about teaching through Black identities, right? The different identities. Principle 5 deals with the Black historical contention, which is probably the most controversial, principle. We also have Black history through social histories because you learn Black history more from the bottom up instead of the top down, if that makes sense. So during the civil rights movement, we largely focus on leaders and government officials, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, people from the top. But if you really want to understand something like the Montgomery bus boycott, you learn about the Black people in Montgomery, and you learn more through that history. And then Black Futures is the last principle, which I can explain a little bit later. But those particular principles all are kind of, situated within the humanity aspect of who Blackness is, right? Blackness is very diverse. Blackness deals with a lot of different aspects in society. And for us to really truly understand the full human experience of Black people, I feel those 8 principles and the way in which we kind of approach those principles can help us really see the humanity of Black people holistically.
I think that piece is so key because all throughout um, events of just Black trauma, Black death, I say, in thinking about 2020 when everybody wanted to get on the anti-racism train, right? We had all the book clubs. Everybody had a book club. We joined in together, and we were going to read and learn and unlearn these harmful things that we were doing. And
Mhm.
those book clubs in 2020 turned to book bans 2 years later. And and I think about how even
And so
throughout
easy too. So easy.
quickly, quickly,
Oh, oh my God. Oh no, they do. I'm so like no resistance whatsoever.
yeah.
Like it was the weakest aspect I've ever seen in my life. And again, it goes back to those, the banana in the tailpipe again. The same thing they did in the late 80s and early 90s, same thing they did in the 60s and 70s, the same thing they did in the 20s and 30s. I mean, it's just ridiculous, but we don't know history. But yeah, they folded like some sheets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so there are many just let's be real. There are many educators who joined the book club in 2020, but now trumpet the book bans, but they're teachers in schools.
Mhm.
They 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 voted for a certain person twice and will vote for him again, and yet they teach black and brown babies who they will never see the humanity in.
Mhm.
They look at accounts, reports, of folks experiencing racial trauma, racial harm, you know, at the hands of the state. Look at the deaths of black men, black women, right, who are being gunned down by police, and then say, wait for all the facts, because for whatever reason, they will not allow for the humanity of black folk. Now, those same teachers are in classrooms and they have to navigate feeling, using excuses of maybe not feeling adequate enough to do this or to teach this, but our babies deserve it, right? Like there's so much at stake here in the emotional context of where we reside. And so my my thing is, folks who are listening who will want to take this up and will want to touch and grapple with the principles that you've mentioned may struggle with the piece about having those multiple perspectives, having folks disagree, because we like things in nice and neat packages,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
We don't deal with tension much. And so when we throw ideas out there, when folks disagree or folks have differing opinions, we want to use whatever power we have to make it streamlined and easy, because that's how we understand learning. So I
Well, you
would
know
love for
what?
you. No, please go ahead.
We don't know how to disagree.
Absolutely.
When we think about all this bull crap we watch on the news, right, our news entertainment
Hmm.
channels, even like our sports, right, First Take and all this, right, like, like we don't know how to have a discussion, a discourse, and
Yeah.
know how to disagree, and know how to talk about different points.
Yeah.
We don't know how to talk about ideas. We talk about people, but we don't talk about ideas,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And that's something I use in my college classes. I say, hey, we're going to be reading these things, and remember, we discuss ideas. We disagree with ideas. We're not talking about the person. We're not connecting those ideas to that particular purpose, because learning is supposed to be hard. Learning is
Hmm.
supposed to take time, right? As a principal, you understand, like, we're in a profession where we might not see the fruits of our labor until 10 years when they leave the school.
Yeah.
But we expect, because of standardized testing, that, oh, you're supposed to be superior and efficient, with all these particular numbers. But I mean, even as a doctor, a professor, there's certain things from my graduate school life that I'm finally realizing now. Like, oh, okay, so learning is supposed to take time. So there is a level of tenderness that we should have with our teachers, particularly because they were educated in the same school systems that we, were educated in.
Yeah.
Some of those best school systems they're from are some of the worst in terms of teaching about diversity and other forms of history. So there is this tenderness, right? Um, but we have to have certain teachers who have a certain disposition to teach aspects of Black history, right? We have to have, and as leaders, as teacher educators, right? We have to do a better job of kind of screening
Mm.
those particular candidates,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, yes, so we understand there's going to be a learning curve involved, but we need for you to jump out and say, I'm going to try this. I may mess up. I may even get some people upset, or whatever the case may be, but you have to
Yeah.
have some form of disposition to really approach these particular topics. But yeah, I mean, we don't know how to disagree. And
Yeah.
that's a big thing. Like social studies teachers love debate.
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, that's fine. Sometimes debate's a good pedagogical method, or whatever the case may be, but everything's not really a debate. I don't have to
Mm,
debate like so like during this time every single year. It's one of those things where why do we need Black History Month? I mean, I'm not here to debate about Black History Month. Like Black History Month is Black History Month, and where I'm from, we're going to celebrate it, right? I'm not here to debate that. Now, if you want to have a discussion about the ideas, about the ways that we should approach it, right? But everybody wants to debate. This is not a debate. That's not good pedagogy in many ways.
mm,
How can we deliberate? How can we, come to some form of a consensus? And if we can't come to a consensus, you have to really tell me why we can't come to a consensus through evidence, through intellectual banter, right? Through all
mhm.
these particular aspects. But yeah, we don't know how to disagree.
Yeah, I think that is that's so true, right? You think about how everything kind of devolves into an argument, and everything it becomes a point of who's on the right or wrong side of
Who's
history.
going to win?
Uh, who's gonna win? Everything. It becomes that piece. I think about, I want to respect your time, and we're coming up on time here, but I want to ask you to speak to, and this is going to lead into what I hope you'll plug at the end. Uh, your component or piece, with regard to your framework, is this concept of Black futurism.
Yeah.
I love this piece. Um, it is honestly a practice of mine to try to push myself to continuously freedom dream about what the possibilities might be. So when you talk, for myself, for my students, I try to make this a practice, because when you get stuck in the weeds of education, sometimes that stuff can become very difficult, and you come
Yeah.
disillusioned to what's possible for our students, what's possible for us. So you talk about Black futurism. How can educators incorporate this into their teaching, and why is it important for students to freedom dream, to have
Yeah.
this as part of who they are?
So several different components that make up Black futurism. Um,
Yeah.
Probably the most popular component is when we take Black science fiction, which uses history to teach us about
Yeah.
the future, right? We can kind of
Yeah.
delve into those particular things to make literature a little bit more interesting, to expand our imagination and everything like that. So that's fine. A lot of people first think about that, which is fine, and that's part
Yeah.
of it. But what I'm really thinking about is giving students permission to dream.
Yeah.
And this is really important because in a lot of times in our classrooms, teachers look at their classroom as a curriculum. I'm teaching this curriculum, right? But in reality,
Yep.
we need to look at those students in the class as I'm not teaching a curriculum, I'm teaching citizens. So
Hmm.
when we reframe the way in which we look at, okay, I'm teaching citizens, then based on the knowledge in which I'm presenting, what what knowledge do these future citizens need? Because they're going to be future decision makers in the next few years, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's about giving them permission to dream because every great invention was a dream at a time.
Yeah.
My center that I run was a dream in 2010.
Mm.
And by 2018, I had that center. Apple
Yep.
was a dream, right? All these great inventions were a dream, right? Um, so I look at Black futurism as more of an instructional model. Why don't we use what we know of history to help students correct the present and predict the future? Or, so taking contemporary issues and how can we solve these contemporary issues based on the history that we've learned?
Yep.
For example, a lot of people may think about Black Lives Matter, which seems to kind of you know fall off the wayside since 2021.
Hmm.
But many people connected Black Lives Matter to kind of a more contemporary civil rights movement, right?
Hmm.
So for those students who may have a dream about becoming a civil rights leader or a civil rights activist or a civil rights lawyer or anything dealing with improving our race, class, socioeconomic society. Why can't we look at Black Lives Matter, the strategies of Black Lives Matter, the strategies of the 1960s civil rights movement? What are the differences? What are the similarities? Compare the two. Um, what made what made Black Lives Matter successful? What made them not as successful? What made 1960 civil rights movement successful? Now, what are the implications of those two things? If now you are becoming a civil rights lawyer, what strategies would you use from learning about the past? What strategy would you use to learn from those two organizations,
Hmm.
right? To make it a little bit more successful, right? What were some of their mistakes? What was some, you know what I'm saying? Like some people would say, hey, they were too decentralized. There needed to be a centralized aspect, or hey, the civil rights movement were too male centric, right? Type of deal. So you have all those particular issues, but you're using the knowledge of the past to give yourself the permission to dream about the future. You asked the question earlier about our society and what's the implications as to what's for not learning Black history. Well, one of the things is that our students will become decision makers in the future, but in schools we don't give them permission to dream. So when they become decision makers, what we're doing in the society is we're starting over again. So those people in 2020 who said, I didn't know that, oh my gosh, why didn't I learn that in school? Guess what those people now who went through Black futurism in school is not going to do? Oh, I know about this. I already made the blueprint. The only thing now they have to do is implement it,
Yeah,
because we gave them permission in school to dream about creating a better future,
that's good, Doc.
right?
That's good, Doc.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely,
Yeah, because it's
absolutely.
just
And
like
I'm
we don't give them the dreams. We just say, hey, standardized tests, pass this test, and now you graduated. Let's go. But we don't, have them think about their future. Y'all are gonna be the decision makers,
that part.
the leaders.
So I want to round out our time, and I want you to plug obviously the conference and how can folks get in touch with you. Um, but before I do that, I just want to thank you so much for sharing space with us. I hope that educators who are listening are going to grapple with uh,
Yeah.
giving our students one the permission to dream, but also looking through a lens of what did we say about us,
Mm,
right? What did
mhm.
we say about us? Stop giving the mic to folks who don't look like us to tell our stories. We can tell them
Yeah.
for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I hope folks get that. But how can folks get in touch with you, connect with you, and then please plug the conference that's coming up.
Yeah, so you all can look on our website, the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. If ever you do the Center of Black History, you'll will be one of the first things to come up. Our seventh conference is coming up July 26th through the 29th, which is the end of July. Um, this is our seventh conference. We average around 300 to 400 educators from around the country that come to learn about the best practices of Black history education. Our theme this year is Black to the Future. Afrofuturism is Black history. So if you have any proposal ideas, we're accepting proposals now. And if you go on our website, you will see where you can submit your proposal. Now, if you have just some bomb Black history lessons you want to share with everybody that doesn't deal with Afrofuturism, we welcome those as well, because this is a Black History conference. But I will tell you this, right? We've been doing it for 7 years. I feel like a matchmaker, right? People have been going to my conference and they've been getting the connections to people from around the country is probably the most important aspect, right? You meet people from
Yeah.
Philadelphia, New Jersey, California, Texas, Georgia, all these particular people. And for those who are needing a space, a Black History space, this is the Black History space that you'll meet all different types of people. So um, please join us. I mean, we're looking for proposals. Registration is only $115, and you're not going to beat that for 3 days of learning
Sure won't.
ever from a conference.
Yeah.
Now, we use that, to help pay for everybody. This is the only professional development that you have to pay for, and we do a lot of professional developments, like our Saturday Black History Nerds that we have. Um, so please join us. Visit the website. You'll learn a whole bunch of stuff about the center. You can join me in all my social medias, just LaGarrett King and all my social medias. And yeah, I look forward to it. And please, if you see me, come talk to me.
Listen, y'all, please connect to the work that Dr. LaGarrett King is doing. Um, Phenomenal, needed, and I think you know um, when we think about the time that we're sitting in with everything that we're experiencing with anti-black legislation, this is needed more now than ever. So I commend that to you, folks, and thank you so much for sharing space into the community. Thank you so much for tapping in. For those in the comments, Brooke, Miss Smiley, Miss Johnson, thank y'all so much for tapping in. Um, let's and let's keep pushing, y'all. I appreciate
Yeah,
y'all.
definitely. Thank you.